it's something that we actually accept as true or certain, or that it exists and we don't really need any kind of a proof for it. So if we read it's a private key, well, we just assume it's a private key, okay? Because we saw this like multiple times before, hopefully, and we know that if it says private key, it should have private key. And we don't really go ahead and check every private key we ever find on customer systems, whether it's a private key or not, because then we might as well check out the things that we hope to be true, and then we will never finish our assignment in time, because it's just not enough time for it, right? But we all know these things are really bad for everyone, and I'm sure you know that they still happen. They happen to the best of us, and they happen to me as well, even though I'm not the best one, but still. So I wondered why it is, and I started looking around, and it turns out that making assumptions is an optimization for our brain. This is how it saves energy, because when you assume something, you don't have to think about it. And thinking takes energy, and energy needs to be saved, and by skipping the thinking part, we just save energy, and our brains are more efficient that way, supposedly. And it means that in the end, it makes living for us more pleasant, we spend less energy, we can do joyful things. Well, that's until it is not, of course. So it kind of makes sense if you think about it, and if you look at a couple of examples that at least me, in my experience, and I'm sure at least some of you have encountered, before, something like someone saying, oh, this has never happened before in our practice, in our company, in our whatever, because, well, they have never been hacked. Well, they then assume that this is how it's going to stay, and therefore there is no need to do anything because it has never happened before, right? But we all know that this is not how it goes usually. Then someone sits around and does nothing, and then they get popped. Some people say that security products like firewalls, like antivirus products are supposed to be secure because, well, they're security products. There's no way ever they will be popped, or there is no way ever that your firewall gets compromised and let people into the organization, right? Which is also not exactly true. Some people also say that something that we found is outside the threat modeling, therefore there's kind of no need to do anything about it because, well, it's outside our threat model, so why spend money on it, right? It's proved, and yeah, we won't do anything. With the implied thinking that, well, hackers won't hack us because it's outside the threat model. It can't happen, right? Because our threat model is the truth, but usually it's not. Then people tend to say that, you know, our employees are fully trusted, and we don't believe that any of them can be possibly, you know, a source of harm for the company. It's like saying that all the people in our company are 100% happy and will not ever do anything bad, which we know it's not true because people tend to be unhappy in companies at times and they tend to leave. And it's very nice when they just leave and not leave any kind of presence in the company as well. One thing that I particularly like is when people say that there is no public exploit for a bug, therefore it won't be exploited ever. Which is rather funny to hear because, well, if there's no public exploit, that doesn't mean there's no private exploit as well, right? And private exploits tend not to be public because, well, they're private and they are traded for money, of course. So this assumption does not really hold at all in practice. So people get both, but not public, but private exploits which you can buy if you want to. And then there is the one that I hate the most is when people say that, oh, this is a proprietary technology. And you're not supposed to know that it exists, and you're not supposed to know that how it works. And hackers will never ever get to know it because it's proprietary. Well, guess what? This is what hackers do. They like proprietary technologies very much because since it is proprietary, it's going to have a host of bugs in it because there's very few people that actually got to look onto it because it costs companies money because they have to hire consultants instead of people who are just looking at technologies for free like it goes for open source projects. And I'm not saying that it's open source, but still it works much better than it does for proprietary tech. So just for being proprietary, it just doesn't make your technology protected from hackers or the product that you use in your product, like for example a processor or something, that it does not become magically unexploitable or infallible just because you cannot just download the datasheet for it. And from the other side of the table, a couple of other things as well. The classic one, like user supplied input, would always be well formatted, like we just accept whatever people throw at us, and we just, at worst, we just produce garbage in the output. But, well, this used to be a thinking for quite some time in good old days, and then someone showed that, by supplying this input, your program does what it's not supposed to do at all, and then it quickly, I think, went out of use. So input validation became a thing, action, and it turned out that you're supposed to reject input that you don't like, because otherwise it does harm, actually. It's a nice one because the next one, because people tend not to think about it too much, but still, back in the days when you have your computer for your program, this used to be true, but not anymore. In the days of modern systems with hundreds of processes running at the same time, this is just not true. Your program will not have the machine for itself, and there's bound to be resources that will be touched by other programs. And this used to be true before because, well, it still is true for machines that are installed in data centers and so on, but nowadays we have things like our phones, which are kind of in our hand, but not for your program if you don't check for it. And a related thing to it is, we think that whatever we write usually executes like in a blink of time and doesn't take any energy to do so, and therefore does not leak any kind of information via different side channel attacks. Well, side channels were not a thing before people actually thought about that, but it turns out that it is actually not true, and your program takes a finite amount of time to run, and it does things that can be traced via different side channels like power, like sign, even like acoustic side channels, which is crazy, but still. And finally, it's a new and fresh one. I'm sure some of you know about it, but we still expect that system memory works perfectly well, that whatever we write to memory, we will read it back like it was written, but as it has been proven quite recently that it is not really true. If raw hammer sounds familiar, then that's it. So yeah, we can write to memory and we can read back a different value, so it happens. And you can think, well, fine, so what? What does it mean for me? Well, oops, what about your own product? Have you ever assumed that evil user input will not ever reach your software component? I'm pretty sure some of us did. Well, I know I did because I wrote some programs which I'm ashamed to talk about. Some people tend also to assume that their products will be installed at protected locations, like where physical access is restricted and so on and so forth, but then it not always happens in this way, right? But have you ever assumed that nobody will ever take your own product apart, especially the physical one? Like you build thing, you glued it shut, it's great, no one will ever touch it until they do, right? Someone with a Dremel will go undo your glue and touch your product, unfortunately. Typically with disastrous consequences, of course. And yeah, and we usually expect that whoever installs our product, knows what they're doing, and they will configure it securely, of course, and so on and so forth. But yeah, when we continue this train of thought, we usually end up with a pretty bad situation like this one. If you don't know what it is, it's an ATM somewhere. And I'm pretty sure that these people also assume that no one will ever touch their product, except as they designed it, and no one will ever open it, and no one will ever look inside. Well, surprise. That simply does not hold true in situations. And of course, whoever installed it was very smart to put it outside. Well, this is how life goes, right? But I can say that assumptions are pretty much everywhere we go, everywhere we do, because this is how our brains work. This is an unfortunate consequence of, our evolution, I imagine. So, what can possibly be done about it? Because if it's our brain, then we gotta take quite a significant effort to, bypass it or work around this unfortunate quirk in our hardware. Well, I say that the first step should be that you document your assumptions, whether they're explicit or implicit. You just write it down, you say that this is what I assume about my product, and these documented assumptions then become requirements for the next stages of the development. And then you can do something about it. Before you write it down, it does not exist simply. Because, for example, you forget about it, you get run over by a car, God forbid, or anything else, and then information magically disappears and the next guy is left with nothing. So it is a great idea, I think, to write things down. Well, I know myself, but I forget stuff all the time. And the next step you do is you actually validate your assumptions. You look at your list that you came up with, and you get someone else to look at it as well. Because this is important, and you can, come up with wild stuff, and then it just does not correspond to reality in one way, in two ways, in many ways. You don't know. This is why you want another guy to look at it. And see, does it even make sense? What I thought about, does it even, have some relation to reality? If I assume that this will not be ever installed in a trusted place, it's fine for an ATM, but not always. But it's not fine for a fire alarm, for example, because they will be installed in untrusted places, and you can simply assume that they will not. And the other thing you want to check for is whether the list that you have is actually complete. Whether you forgot anything, whether you assume something implicitly in the list but you thought it is, and so on. It gets tedious when you have a list of like 40 points that you have to go through, and then you start to lose things. And then if this all is grand, then you just, you're good to go and write some code, and maybe it will be good. But before you actually go to release, it's great to verify things, that your assumptions, how did they exactly translate into the implementation? Do they actually still hold, or have things changed in the years of development, and then they no longer make any sense, and requirements like functional requirements could have changed as well, and then things shifted, and then something is not really correct anymore, and so on and so forth. And also you want to check whether something was actually added explicitly or implicitly during development, because people tend to assume things, as we all know now. And a developer or two might have added their own assumptions into the code they write. So you might end up with more than you actually asked for in terms of assumptions, and it's a very great practice to validate whether this is true or not. So yeah, so some of you might think that these things are obvious. I mean, of course you have to check what you do, you have to have a list of things you assume, but it's these things that actually get you most of the time, because you forget about simple things most of the time because, well, they're simple, you don't have to think about it. And here's where you actually make big mistakes. So how about the different side of things, right? For the white, gray, and black hat somehow. Well, I say that testing pens for fun and profit is great. It's a lot of fun. You find bugs, you get your, but then again, and don't take me wrong, it feels great, I know. I have a couple of CVs for myself as well, but still. What about the impact of your work that you spent? What about those weeks that you invested into find this nice little bug? And then you got the CV and then everyone forgets about it, right? It's still cool. Don't take me wrong, it's still cool, it's still awesome, but I dare say that the impact of the work was not as good as it could be. Therefore, I just wanted to shift the perspective a little bit and say that instead of finding bugs, finding assumptions that people make when they develop products is much better. Because apart from poor craftsmanship at programming, at hardware design, most issues I would say are caused by wild assumptions that nobody actually took care to verify. And yeah, if you exploited one little bug that you found, cool, you broke one product, great, you get your CV, very much done, thank you very much. But if you find a nice assumption and break it, you basically own the whole land. Because if you think about what Maurice's form did, it was amazing. They broke everything. If you think about what the impact was for the first power analysis work, it was groundbreaking. Everyone was crazy, everything fell apart. If you think about what Tempest did to the world when it was first announced, so to say, everyone was crazy as well. Same for Spectre Sound, same for Warhammer, and these kind of things are what we ultimately should hunt for. Not just like a couple of CVs now and then, but we should probably aim for big, great things, not small ones. So I just want you to think proactive in that regard, not reactive like, oh, I go find bugs and then maybe do something about it, but instead try to think forward. We already know that assumptions cause big problems, so why don't we look for it? Why do we want to settle for small things instead of going for big ones? I say there is no reason to. We should go for the big ones. We should look forward and try to spot assumptions that people make in everyday life. Like, oh, what do they assume? They assume that the door will open when you revolve in door here. It will revolve when you come by, right? But not always. And if you think about it, there is quite a lot of such things that we take for granted in our everyday life, and same in our professional life too. Little things that we do that we just assume they will always be true, and they turn out not to be. So I would want you guys to talk to each other, to talk to the fellow developers and ask them how to do their work, and see what they do without thinking much about it, what they accept as granted, and have for the spend an hour or two talking to them and trying to find out why do they take it for granted. There might be a reason for it and they might be not. And the answer like, oh, it always worked that way does not count as a good reason. So, yeah, you should change the way of working, how people do things, and not the result of their product, like what they made. Because if you only challenge the end result, you will always end up behind and not really helping much. Because if people do not change the ways they do things, they will always make bad products. That's obvious and unfortunately so, but it happens to be true. So yeah, I dare you to challenge assumptions and not implementations, and of course, hack the plan. And
Does it work? Or maybe I should just speak up. Okay.
We can try. Yes.
Thanks for a great talk. Like, what are your thoughts about making it public what you have tested and yeah, your verification tests, like for both closed source projects and open source projects? Like I like if they put like on GitHub, this is all the tests we have done, and we assume this and this and that. Will it be a good thing or bad thing? Because I can see both sides, right? Because it's a good thing that you can easily find mistakes that people have made, but that could also be exploited by the wrong people, right? What are your thoughts?
I can say that a lot of people do put out their like testing frameworks and test sets into the public domain. I put my exploits as well, the ones that I was not paid for, obviously, as in not the customer work. And well, personally, I wouldn't mind sharing what I broke, but it looks like the clients might. So unfortunately, they paid me to not do it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that's kind of expected, right? They don't really want their products to fall apart just because they want to talk about it.
But I guess it would make, if it was like a common standard that you publicize this whole test thing you have done on your product, I guess it will like push people to actually to do to do proper testing if they had to like put it out in the public.
I feel like this is one of the goals of the OWASP project as well, to have like a common base and common like a baseline for testing the software. Well, at least software, and I think there was also some work at least on the hardware side of things. So personally, I just kill it.
Hack the planet. Just shout.
Yeah. So personally, I do believe in the saying that sharing is caring, and I would very much like everyone to do the same. And I really hope that the day comes then when we will share what we do publicly, but it's not yet there.